My name is Carolyn Jones. I am the Director of the Institute of Employment Rights and a Joint National Secretary of the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom. Can I start first with a few thank yous? Thanks to the North West TUC for kindly sponsoring this event tonight, and to my colleagues James Harrison and Sarah Glenville for their assistance behind the scenes. I'm proud to be chairing this event tonight. I'm proud to sit along our invited speakers, people who, one way or another, have faced up to the powers that be and held them to account. You can imagine on a subject like resisting anti-union activity, resisting anti-union employers, the wide choice we had when deciding the themes and the anti-union activity and the speakers on who to address tonight. The scope, as you can imagine, was depressingly wide. A flick through the pages of the Morning Star reveals the extent to which workers and their trade unions are attacked on a daily basis. So, for instance, we could have looked at fire and rehire tactics, the current vogue amongst employers in terms of attacking workers' terms and conditions. We could have discussed the fact that around 3 million workers have been robbed of over £24 billion in unpaid overtime. Or we could have focused on workplaces like the DVLA, a government organisation, who have been intimidating people into work in overcrowded workplaces without adequate risk assessment, leading to one of the biggest workplace outbreaks of COVID that we have seen. The list of possible topics, issues and speakers is endless. But I think our two trade union speakers with us tonight are perfectly positioned to discuss both the legal and the industrial issues facing trade unions and their members today. Howard Beckett is going to share his insight and hopefully his tactics in dealing with legal issues and police claims that pickets should be further restricted in what they can do during COVID. While Mick Ricks will highlight the tactics used by Amazon to avoid union recognition, the impact that has on the terms and conditions of workers, and some of the ways the GMB are hoping to smash through that anti-union barrier. But it's perhaps the subplot of our discussion tonight, the exposure and consideration of the role of the state that has played in undermining the role of trade unionists and campaign activists, that is particularly disturbing. And I'll declare an interest here in this discussion. I grew up in a family that struggled with the impact of blacklisting. My father was a shop steward on building sites. He was often refused work with all the social and economic problems that brought with it. It wasn't until years later, when we were sent a copy of the Economic League's blacklist, that we realised that not only had my dad been blacklisted for many years, but the whole of our family, all 5 of us, were on that list. And of course, being an active trade unionist in the construction industry in the Northwest, my dad played his part in the 1972 building workers' strike. He was also chair of the Shrewsbury24 Defence Committee, set up when the building workers were jailed following the strike. So the story, brilliantly researched and explained by Eileen Turnbull on the collusion between the state, the police and the employer federations, is a story close to my heart. But first, turning to our first speaker tonight, she has without doubt played an outstanding role in standing up, in speaking out and in holding the state to account for its actions. As you will know, the Metropolitan Police's Special Demonstration Squad and the National Public Order Intelligence Unit together infiltrated more than 1,000 political groups dating back to 1968. Over that time, it's known that at least 30 women were deceived into long-term relationships with undercover cops. Of course, the Met claim that these relationships were the actions of rogue officers rather than a deliberate tactic, but the sheer number of the relationships between activists and spy cops and the similarities in the tactics used suggest otherwise. Alison, and I will say that's not her real name, was a target of police undercover surveillance and is a core participant in the Meeting public inquiry. She is one of the inspirational women activists who have fought the Met Police for many years over the Spy Cops scandal, and she was a founding member of Police Spies Out of Lives and the campaign opposing police surveillance. Alison is going to speak to us tonight, but she's going to speak off camera, although she has got a video to share with us. So, Alison, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to the Institute of Employment Rights for inviting me to speak this evening and for supporting our campaign so wholeheartedly. So that's our slide. Okay, so it's a bit weird because you can't see me, but I'm going to try my best to bring it alive with some pictures and to start really by talking about our campaign and our support group, Police Spies Out of Lives. Like you said, it was set up in 2011 by and for the first 8 of us who brought legal action against the Metropolitan Police for being deceived into intimate relationships by undercover police officers who were infiltrating a range of political groups. Our campaigning in part led to the setting up of the Undercover Police Inquiry, and that was established in 2015. This was due to report in 2018. But because of ongoing delays, the latest date that we've got is 2024, but it's likely that it will probably be after that. So our group provides practical and emotional and peer support for more than 20 women who are affected. There are more than that, but we work directly with about 20. And these women are taking new legal cases and engaging with the public inquiry. A key part of our campaigning is to focus on the institutional sexism within the Metropolitan Police. And we support women launching strategic litigation to hold the state to account, as you said. Another key aim, I suppose, and that's partly why I'm speaking this evening, is to raise public awareness of this state-sponsored violation of women's human rights in order to contribute to a culture in which this can never happen again. Now, you said before that I was the target of police surveillance. The ironic position that many of us are in is that we actually don't even know whether we were the target of police surveillance or whether we were somehow collateral intrusion, as they like to say. If I go to, I said before, I now feel like Jonathan Van Tam. So if we can have slide 2, please. Thank you. So this is Mark. This was my ex-boyfriend, Mark Jenner, who I knew as Mark Cassidy. He was a joiner from Birkenhead. I met him in 1995 when I was a member of the Colin Roach Centre, which was a campaigning group in Hackney. And the areas of interest that I had particularly was campaigning against fascism, racism, and ironically, again, police monitoring. And Mark joined in spring 1995 and disappeared 5 years later in spring 2000. We lived together for 4 of these years and he was fully integrated into my family life. That photograph there of him with his tie is at my stepbrother's wedding. The one on the left, I think, is in Thailand, the one below is in Crete, and there he is enjoying Subutio in our front room. And in the middle is one of his diaries, I think from '96, in which he's noted that he was attending a UCAT meeting. Mark was a member of UCAT. He chaired the Brian Higgins Defence Campaign. Brian Higgins, as many of you I'm sure know, is as a blacklisted worker, had one of the biggest blacklisting files. And Mark regularly socialised with my NUT colleagues from work. I was a teacher during the time we were together. And despite settling my civil claim and offering the unprecedented apology that some of us received in 2016 from the Met, they have still provided no disclosure. So I have no answers as to why Mark was so embedded in my life. And I later discovered that throughout our relationship, he was married with 3 children. And then subsequently discovered that all the officers in the squad also had to be married, which is partly how we understand the institutional sexism in the force functioned. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see some of these officers. Here are the images of some of the ones we know about. To be clear, we feel that these men are personally responsible for what they did, but they are not solely responsible. The responsibility also lies with their handlers, their managers, and all those who are tasked with oversight of their deployments, right up the tree. We campaign to raise awareness of the institutional sexism in the police that is, as I said, fundamental to understanding how this happened. It's not a It's not a kind of a bit part to the story. It's not the human interest. It's not the human interest angle that helps people engage with the politics of the story. It is part of the politics of the story, and we want the public inquiry to make a finding in its report of institutional sexism in the police, and to make recommendations of how this should be addressed. So if we look at the next slide, Carolyn mentioned at the beginning some of the figures. This is an infographic that we have on our spycops.co.uk website. And you see some of the numbers, some sort of stats really here, but we're talking about over 30 women who were deceived in the way that I was. Also deceased children who had their identity stolen, justice campaigns that were spied on, elected politicians, and blacklisted workers and political activists. The reason that link is at the bottom is because we really are trying to encourage people to look at the UCPI website and look at the names of the cover names of the police who are involved, going back from 1968 to much more recently, to see whether those names are familiar and to try to remember who they might have been and work out whether there were any women connected to them in intimate relationships. In the next slide, part of our strategy from the outset was to talk to the media and to try to control the story, I suppose, while the case was beginning. And so we tried to raise awareness about the case rather than the police shutting it down and striking it out. We tried to engage with as many different media outlets and to reach as many new audiences as possible, because we felt that whilst The Guardian was a very good ally from the outset and has been throughout, it's important that we reach people who don't read The Guardian, which is sort of most people, really. So the next slide is a recent article that I wrote in the NEU magazine. That's from this month, that was just printed, I think, last week. And it focuses on the infiltration of trade unions specifically, and I describe it as an attack on the foundations of democracy. I was an active NUT member in inner London, and it really kind of, for many years, obviously, you know, when we first launched the case, our focus was on defining the patterns of behaviour from these officers and identifying the systemic institutional sexism. But as it's moved on and you kind of get a broader picture of it, I look back and realise, actually, of course, Mark had full access to everything that I was doing as an NUT activist and my colleagues. And so that's what that article is, and I would encourage people to read it if they're interested, but also to contextualise it by saying that unions that we know were spied on now, so the NUT, Unite, the FBU, the NUM and the RMT, and they're the ones that we know about. So I'm now going to talk a little bit on the next slide about our campaigning. I'm aware that I'm kind of rushing through because 10 minutes isn't very long. I've got quite a lot to say, but this is just kind of a bit of the history of our campaigning. We did a big campaign, as many may remember, with Lush, that got the police backs up quite a lot. And just notice there the graphic we used, which we got quite a lot of stick for, which was having a police officer with a helmet on. When I show you a slide, because it was suggested that that was outrageous because we're talking about different sort of police somehow. But later on, you'll see the graphic from the Undercover police inquiry itself uses a police helmet to symbolise the police. But more recently, we did a podcast, 7 of us contributed to a podcast with The Telegraph, which was not our natural home, but again, to reach new audiences. It's not behind a paywall, and it's available on, it's free, and it's available on Apple and Spotify. And I would recommend people, you know, who are new to the story of the women to listen to that and to share that more widely as possible, because it's a very well produced. It's been nominated, I think, for an award, but it's a very well produced account of the women's experience and how we came together to identify those patterns that I've described. So finally, the Chiz Bill, that was a curveball that was thrown to us last autumn, just before the last tranche of the inquiry. The Labour Party have abstained rather than opposed it. There have been some people haven't in the Labour Party, but as the leadership have abstained. The only amendment, as I understand, that has been passed relates to child spies. And essentially, from our point of view, it makes legal all the things that we're trying to make illegal, which is not great. And they say that the Human Rights Act protects us against rape, torture and murder. But our experience has directly shown through Kate Wilson's case that the Human Rights Act has absolutely not protected us. And Kate's case in the IPT, her trial starts, that trial starts in April, on April the 19th. It's unclear as well how this legislation will impact on the significance of the findings of the public inquiry, because usually the findings would inform future legislation. And as a result of the Chiz Bill, it does beg the question whether the findings from the inquiry become irrelevant. The final slide, penultimate slide. The penultimate slide is just the next hearings. They're at the Amber Hotel in Marble Arch. Tranche 1, Part 2 is due to start on the 21st of April. It's going to hear from undercover officers and non-state witnesses about the SDS between 73 and 82. And I think you have to register, but no one's very clear at the moment how. So I think that the details about registration go up a little bit beforehand, so it's worth keeping an eye on that. And I just draw your attention again to the icon of the police's helmet that the Undercover Police Inquiry used, that they didn't get in any trouble for, and that we did in the Lush campaign. And then moving on, very finally, our demands. So the last slide. These are joint demands that have been agreed by us, the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance, Undercover Research Group and the Blacklist Support Group, and others who we work with. These are the demands to the inquiry, that the chair, Sir John Mitting, reconsiders his decision to refuse visual live streaming. He has agreed to audio live stream. We still want a panel of experts to be appointed to assist him, a more diverse group of experts. We want all the cover names of the undercover officers disclosed. We want to know all the names of the organisations that have been spied on. We want full disclosure of our registry files. We want the terms of reference including Scotland and Northern Ireland, and we want the trade unions, alongside all participating non-state core participants, are given funding for legal costs so they're able to fully participate, because at the moment there is a discrepancy between the way trade unions who have been spied on are funded and the way other core participants are. So I think that's it from me for the moment. And thank you again for the opportunity to explain all that.
Thanks very much for that, Alison. Thanks for that run through your very interesting presentation. It is horrifying, but also in the horrifying, the actions that you've had to put up were a bit inspiring as well in your reaction. At the Institute and the campaign, we are more than happy to assist in disseminating your information and popularising awareness about your campaigns. We'll carry your video and all the rest of it on our website and promote that too. So thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you as we go on, but for the time being, I will move swiftly on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Howard Beckett. Welcome, Howard. Howard is going to talk about the right to strike and COVID-19 and picketing. Howard is an executive committee member of the Institute of Employment Rights, but in his day job, he has for many years been a senior experienced in legal practitioner and was appointed in April 2011 to the post of legal director for Unite the Union. He is the Assistant General Secretary of Unite for Politics and Legal, reporting directly to their General Secretary, Len McCluskey. So, Howard, we all love a success story, and Unite have had a few of those during this pandemic, whether that's a British Airways or on Fire and Rehire or recent bus companies and others on picketing. So, talk us through some of your highlights, Howard.
Thanks, Cad, and thank you for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to share a panel. And can I just particularly just indulge myself by saying good evening to you, Eileen, and the tremendous success of getting the Shrewsbury24 case to the Court of Appeal, which Unite backed all the way. And it's just an incredible story of 40 years of struggle in order to try to finally expose the light in respect of the injustices that Shrewsbury have experienced. And obviously hearing from Alison, let's hope that it's not 40 years of struggle in respect of exposing what's gone on with the spy cops, although those of us who are involved in it, and obviously John Henry is acting for Unite in respect of it, those of us who are involved in the spy cops don't hold out much hope for justice in the same way as those of us who are involved in the Grenfell inquiry don't hold much hope for justice either in respect of it. And I think I'll probably stray slightly off my briefing, if that's okay, Cad, because it is a political time that we're living through, and I do intend to address that in reference to what we should expect from Labour, and particularly Labour's front bench at this time of a worker crisis. But Cad, you're quite right that in a moment of the most difficult of times for workers and disastrous times, workers have lost their lives through this crisis, that the trade unions have stepped up in an extraordinary way. And events such as tonight give us an opportunity to tell the wider public out there of what we've been doing, because obviously if we don't say it, you can be pretty sure that the mainstream media and the press will not say it. The reality is, of course, that workers have been forced into work through this crisis in order to keep the economy going. We have a reality that we did not have a government that was in any way interested in zero COVID, did not want to follow a plan to get rid of COVID as quickly as possible, obviously followed a narrative that the economy mattered more than people. As a consequence of that, not only have people lost their lives in the hundreds of thousands that we know, but the economy has been destroyed by the mishandling of COVID by the Conservative government. And unfortunately, the harsh reality for all of us is that Labour has not been an effective opposition in respect of this, has gone along with things and has been far too late in respect of giving a different narrative, has never offered a zero COVID narrative, which they should have done. And as the recent experience of the NEU shows, that right up to the day that schools were opened at a time when everybody knew that it was going to increase the amount of deaths, Labour was still banging an establishment drum about the importance of schools being opened, whenever the reality was that this was going to cause the loss of lives for working class people. But in amongst that, the trade unions have taken principled stances, and it's great to see Mick on the panel. And I see the stance that they've taken across the board in respect of their disputes, but most notably, obviously, in British Gas. And right from the word get-go, Cad, we decided that our position was that the right of life was the principle that we would always follow. Extraordinary whenever we think about it, that someone somewhere, sometime felt that you had the right of life on legislation. Just extraordinary concept that people would think that people's lives were so expendable that you would actually have to write down Article 2, the right of somebody to go into a workplace and the right for them to go home. But that is what somebody had to do at one stage. And suddenly at this pandemic, the height of this pandemic, we realized how relevant it was, and our Section 44 and Section 100 rights. Sadly, Cad, as you'll know, those are individual rights designed and written in a fashion where trade unions are prevented from telling their members of the right of life. The disgraceful ASLEF case, which I'm sure John Hendy could talk about in more detail, where the mere sending out of a text to members to advise them of their statutory rights to live was held to be inducing collective action, unlawful industrial action, an absolute disgrace. Well, we decided at Unite at the outset to ignore that. We decided to release to our members their Section 44 and their Section 100 rights. We decided to tell our members of the importance of them leaving a workplace that was unsafe. Don't put yourself in harm's way. Do not risk you and your family's lives, but leave that workplace. And at the outset of COVID, that was effective, Cad. So we, in the food and drink and meats sector, 13 walkouts immediately. And it's recently been effective in Arriva in Cardiff in South Wales. We shut the site recently, and our members were placed on the furlough because of the unsafe working conditions that they were placed in. And obviously, we all know the tragedies that we've seen through COVID. We all know the experiences in London buses, the lost lives that we have, our members have had. We all know frontline members who have been exposed. We can talk about the lack of PPE of the government. We can talk about the poor advice. Who can forget the Prime Minister telling us that it was our civic duty to have a pint? Who could forget eat out to help out? And who could forget the Prime Minister shaking hands as he visited hospitals? Disgraceful examples that have caused the loss of lives. And now the narrative is changing to a situation where the government is starting to talk about whether or not workers should have a contractual clause to take the vaccine absolute and utter nonsense that is designed to spread the message that workers have in some way caused this virus or spread this virus. Workers wanted to be safe at home at all times, and workers do not need contractual clauses in order to take their virus. And I always try to remind people of a small story that I have in respect of one of our executive members who works for Sainsbury's, was forced into a workplace because the government never defined non-essential and essential work in a way that people could refuse to go into the workplace, faced with the prospect of either staying at home and starving her family, or alternatively going into work and risking that she would take the COVID back to her family. And she was told by her employer that she was feeding the nation and her work was essential. And she replied by saying, well, how about giving me a wage so as I can feed my family? And that is the truth for all of us walking forward. Cad, you refer to the extraordinary legislation that has been passed during this crisis. The right of protest obviously restricted, and we must watch that and whether or not that will be extended. There's another vote coming up in Parliament to extend that, and it was a mistake in the first place, and we should watch that. But obviously we experienced ourselves at Optar in the Northeast, a manufacturing site, our members being forced into work on the premise that their work was essential. They took industrial action, and an overwhelming vote for industrial action, 94% for industrial action. They came out, they put a picket outside the workplace, a lawful picket, one that was upheld by our rights of taking industrial action, one that was safe, social distancing in place, everybody with face masks and sanitizers. And South Yorkshire Police came along and moved them on and said that it was unlawful for them to picket outside their workplace. So lawful for them to be inside in their workplace in unsafe practices, but unlawful for them to have a safe picket, socially distanced, outside their workplace. Moved on, disgraceful, but an example of where our rights could go to. Unite was forced to threaten a judicial review against the government. We wrote to South Yorkshire Police and to the government saying that we would take a judicial review, and it was only on the morning of the court case that the government backed down and sent out communications to all of the police forces around the country to say to them that a picket was lawful during COVID and that the restrictions did not prevent a picket outside a workplace. But we had to fight for it. And Cad, obviously Alison has referenced CHIS and what that does for our rights in respect of it, and the disgraceful position of the Labour Party in respect of abstaining in regard to CHIS, the disgraceful and disingenuous narrative of Keir Starmer that in some way the Human Rights Act prevents the atrocities that have gone on in our movement, doesn't provide any criminal crime whatsoever, is at no protection for our people, runs a horse and cart through legitimate rights, obviously puts an end to all of the blacklisting inquiries, the spy cops inquiries, the Shrewsbury24, all of those things would immediately finish. Rights that are now less than those of American citizens, and we all know how we feel that there's a right-wing state in play there, and we have a Labour Party at the front bench that is not offering an opposition in respect of this. And I wanted to address this because of the title of your seminar tonight, Cad, that this is about workers' rights and the state. And what we expect now of a Labour Party is not to become a party of the state, not to become a party of the establishment, but to remain a party of workers and to remain a party of socialism. And we have to reference this now coming out of COVID, and we have to reference it in a week of the budget. So, Cad, I am going to go off script and be political in respect of this and say very clearly that workers during COVID have kept our nations going. We've lost our workers. They've been exposed to COVID in a way that is bluntly inhumane. If you're poor in this country, you're twice as likely to have died from COVID. And yet it is workers coming out of this that are being asked to pay for this now with their terms and conditions. The disgraceful practices of fire and rehire experienced by Mick and British Gas, experienced on an industrial scale at British Airways, 42,000 of our members dismissed, with 30,000 of them to be re-employed on dramatically reduced terms and conditions. The proposal that members would lose up to 40% of their wages, disgraceful. And how did we combat it? We created a legal strategy, Cad, around a failure to consult, because how could you consult with a workforce that was furloughed? A legal strategy that frankly did not hold up to scrutiny, but was sufficient for us to say to our shop stewards not to go into your room. And obviously, as the passage of time moved on, then industrial action became more relevant. And Cargo is at this moment in time balloting as Mick will probably know, for the settlement that we've negotiated in respect of British Airways, and that will be the end of fire and rehire. That will mean that throughout British Airways, they failed to fire and rehire the workforce, and we successfully got amended terms and conditions. But going forward, we all have to say that coming out of COVID, that those changes that we made are temporary changes, and that we will tackle that when the industries are back up and running, and we will tackle it with industrial action. Livingston, Tesco's and Livingston CAD, again, a workforce that has transported food throughout this crisis, and the employer Tesco's taking the opportunity of crisis to fire and rehire the workforce. Extraordinary amount of profit that Tesco's, Sainsbury's and Lidl have made through this crisis, about to pay out £5.5 million in dividends to its workforce, to its shareholders, at the same time as firing and rehiring the workforce. So this is a time now for us to make this argument for society change, that we expect so much more coming out of this crisis, that we will not return to the norm. And I will, as others have done, reference the Second World War, but I will reference it in the context of 1938 and 1939. The idea that anybody in 1938 would have saw a social state in 1946, or a national health service in 1946, or the idea of their children going to third-tier education, it was inconceivable in 1938, but they demanded it. And after the first wave of this crisis, we far too quickly lost the narrative. The clap on a Thursday night. Well, I'll give you a clap on a Thursday night, Cad. Here's a dispute that Unison have in Heartlands Hospital in the West Midlands, in Birmingham, very close to my heart because I was once a regional secretary there. Porters who worked their way through their crisis. Up the road in Stoke, 2 weeks ago, we had 2 deaths of porters in Stoke. And here's porters in Heartlands Hospital in Birmingham who worked their way through a crisis, and immediately after that crisis, they're being fired and rehired with rota changes that literally mean they sleep to work. And who's bringing this in? Well, Jackie Smith is the head of that of the NHS Trust up in Heartlands, the ex-Home Secretary for the Labour Party. So the time is now for us to demand society change. And if we ever dream of returning to the type of gesture politics of clapping on a Thursday night, well, then I'll chuck my Labour card in the bin immediately. It's an utter disgrace. Working class people have lost their lives. And that's why right here and now, we expect a Labour leader, not because of whether or not there's an economic argument about stimulus or taxation. We expect a Labour leader to be talking about a redivision of wealth in our country. We expect them to be stepping up and saying that workers paid for the financial crash that they never caused with austerity, and it will not happen again. Not with Labour being conniving with it, with a failure of opposition. We expect the Labour leader to talk about the NHS being properly nationalised, about care homes coming into the NHS immediately. We expect them to talk loudly about 15% pay rise for NHS staff. We expect them to reflect that care workers should be valued at more than bankers, and £8.69 an hour is disgusting, and £10 an hour is equally abysmal. We expect the Labour leader to be saying right here and now that what will pay for this structural change in society is a tax on wealth, and we must demand it, because it is the role of the state that will ultimately change workers' lives, and we need a Labour Party that stands up for workers going forward and is prepared to be ambitious and radical and loud and oppositional. And if we don't get it, then frankly, the Labour Party is no longer talking on behalf of the trade union movement. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you very much for that, Howard. A fiery speech there indeed. I'd expect nothing less than for you to go off message and onto politics. What else would one expect? And of course, your analysis of the impact of COVID and its highlighting of the unequal nature of our society is spot on, and the lacklustre defence of workers by the party that is set up to defend organised labour is quite right too. So thank you very much for that. We're doing everything we can, and I see that just in the chat there is information about one of our latest reports, which is on HSE and COVID at work, a case of regulatory failure. You're absolutely right. Things weren't right before. They're definitely not right now. They need to be different as we move forward. So thanks very much for that, Howard. That was great. I'm going to move swiftly on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mick Ricks. Mick Ricks from the GMB, and he's going to be talking to us about Amazon. Mick is a long-term friend of mine and of IER. He's a national officer at GMB with over 23 years experience at a national level, both in the British trade union movement and globally. Mick retains responsibility for transport, logistics and warehousing and distribution sector, the public and private transport, including taxi and private hire drivers and couriers, and he has the strategic lead on organising in Amazon and the gig platform workers. Wonder how you found the time to join us here tonight. But Mick, I recall you were involved in organising members in another anti-union company, which was Walmart, otherwise known as Asda in the UK. Now you have Amazon in your sight. So talk us through your tactics, or at least those that you can share with us here tonight, Mick.
Cad, it's absolutely brilliant to be here tonight, and among some great people that are sharing some fantastic experiences of the challenges that working people have gone through in previous years, and also in the here and now, and you know, and some of the political aspects that people are facing. I mean, you've just mentioned some of the issues of our activity in reaching an agreement a number of years ago with Walmart, Asda, as it was known then, a really famous North American anti-union employer. And it took us a number of years to effectively unionize within the distribution sector of the company. But we managed to do that, and it brought an agreement with the stores. It wasn't perfect, but actually it started to deliver for working people. We had collective bargaining within the distribution, and of course earnings started to rise because of that. Now, you know, at Walmart, with all its legal people at its disposal, and you know, and you've got to understand that quite a number of North American employers that are literally anti-union, very similar to how Amazon are, employ very similar tactics. So, you know, they staff themselves with enormous hordes of lawyers. They control the information and the narrative that comes out from the centre. It's poured over by loads of people before a statement is even made, and that's the way it goes about its business. Very litigious, very threatening, and the use of monies that it has is no problem at all in trying to get its way. So what we've seen is these so-called shiny companies using technology that was founded in Silicon Valley being taken advantage of by faceless investors, very, you know, hedge funds, bankers, and then a human resource initiative about that is based on fundamental principles of anti-trade unionism. And you know, and if we look at some of these issues, that's what we've been faced with in the union movement for a number of years now, with the collapse of certain industries and certain sectors. The willful destruction of some of those sectors were deliberately brought about to end trade unionism within those areas. So what we're now faced with is a situation where there's around 6 million people that are members of trade unions in the UK that are affiliated to the TUC. And I have to say that even with those figures, you know, I do question how many of those 6 million people are actually in work, because it is not uncommon for a number of people like my father and other activists that have stopped work, that they also carry on with their union membership and are proud to carry their union card. So I think those figures in some respects are a little bit skewed. But when you now look at, you know, around the entry of COVID, there's around about 30 million working people in the UK. 10 million of those are in what would term as precarious forms of employment. So either in temporary and agency, 0 hours contracts, and the rise of the gig and the platform economies. You know, so you've got 10 million people that don't know whether they're going to be working tomorrow. They don't know whether they're going to get a wage. They don't know whether they can put food on the table or even pay their rent. And, you know, one of the issues around COVID has been, you know, the collapse of the taxi and the private hire sector in the UK. 350,000 people, licensed people are virtually not earning, and for those that may be earning, are earning 20% of 2019 levels. So real extreme poverty scenarios that are now taking place. So, you know, where does all this fit in with Amazon? Well, it's prime breeding ground. So, you know, what one has to understand that some of these companies have been enticed over here. You know, come over here, create jobs. We'll get people paying taxes because it'll help redress the situation in certain areas of youth unemployment and work, and it's around jobs. So Amazon famously broke into the UK market, and within the last 5 years has just grown exponentially out of all recognition. You know, it's not just a retailer of books and videos and things like that. It's now heavily into merchandise. It's doing its own fashion brands. You know, it's got its own films. It's got its streaming. It's got its TV. You name it. It has branched into so many areas that really it wants to be the dominant force globally. And of course, you know, where it really makes its money is with its cloud computing services through AWS and one or two other things. So, you know, what's this got to do with how come there's some sort of favorable treatment taking place with Amazon? That, you know, for the billions that it's making each year in the UK, is hardly paying, you know, a red cent in tax around these issues. Well, you know, it's quite interesting that if you can procure certain services and also promote certain services, then you'll win favourable government contracts. And over the last few years, Amazon has won massive government contracts on cloud computing services and other services. And for a tax dodger, you know, as serial as what Amazon is, you know, one of the biggest contracts that it's got with UK government, you know, and you know, the irony of it is with HMRC, the tax revenue. So here we have a serial tax dodger. One of its biggest clients in paying money to it is HMRC. And that's how they're getting away with a number of the activities that they can, and the way that things are taking place. So, you know, that actually this company can actually think it can dare then go to another level of anti-union organization, where last year it unlocked software, so it could unlock the privacy settings on Facebook groups of Amazon couriers, so they could actually spy on Amazon couriers in the UK to stop them organizing a union or complaining about how they were being treated. Again, you know, last year, investigations found that our Spanish comrades in the Commissionaires Union out in Spain, you know, who led a series of successful strike actions against Amazon, were actually spied on, and that photographs and other images were taken of activists and strikers, and that is now subject to legal action. So this company doesn't fear anything. You know, it doesn't recognize boundaries. It doesn't recognize certain areas. You know, it even sets up robot accounts on social media to pump out messages. So when we're recounting some stories and some testimonies that we've got from members about issues that are taking place, that then these accounts will start pumping out messages rebutting the effects of those messages. You know, in the summer of 2019, we launched some really tough publicity against Amazon as part of some of our organizing campaigns, actually building on the back of quite a number of successful ground activities that we had, and also within communities. You know, we published real horror health and safety stories of where people were being treated really inhumanely. And we published case studies of members. We did a mass body mapping exercise for those that know about those things, where actually members could show us the pain in the joints that they were getting there. And what was noticeable is, if you work for Amazon in those fulfillment centers and you've had over 2 years working in a fulfillment center as a picker, you know, you are going to be subject to growing real serious problems with body deterioration, onset of MSDs setting in, and the potential onset of industrial disease. And as most people will know, one of the potentials of constantly working at pace and productivity without decent breaks, and having to work at unregulated and inhumane and unscientific productivity targets, that potential industrial disease can lead to heart disease, and heart disease is one of the biggest causes of heart attack potentially amongst workers. And 87% of our members that took place in that body mapping exercise showed that they were in some form of constant pain. So having that information, it's what you actually then do with it, and how can you do that to make things better. So actually what we did was, because we realized that some of these issues that members had been complaining to us about, they had related in potential industrial accidents as well. So we sent FOI requests out to all the ambulance trusts in the UK where there is an Amazon fulfillment centre. What came back in terms of the information was horrifying. You know, hundreds of ambulances being sent to Amazon sites, you know, really about one every 2 days that we could prove for a range of injuries that people were subjected to. Miscarriages was another common example. Potential strokes was another example, and people with broken bones being carted off into ambulances. You know, this started to give you the semblance that, you know, this is not a 21st century employer, that actually it was reviving the tactics of the 18th century mill owners in a number of areas. And we did a number of other issues around this, and we saw a statement from Amazon that was published, trying to rebut some of the stuff that we've done. So we actually, and they quoted the HSC, so we wrote to the HSC. Funny enough, we had to write to them twice to get a reply. And we wrote to the HSC asking for this information. That was these reports true, that Amazon was saying that they had the lowest injuries of anybody within these sectors, because we could actually prove, you know, that there were unionized facilities that were also near to Amazon sites, such as Tesco distribution depots, where Unite or Usdaw are recognised, Asda distribution depots where we're recognised, and one, two other places where actually the accidents were quite few and far between. And it's not uncommon to go over 365 days on those unionised sites without a particular RIDDOR, where, as what we were finding out in Amazon, there was a whole spate and a whole raft of these issues. The HSC, after the second time of writing, did write to us and actually completely rebuffed Amazon's public statements and basically said they didn't recognise what Amazon were claiming, and that actually the HSC had not done reports on these things. So we actually published that as a damning indictment that, you know, Amazon was trying to lie its way through in the media in the UK. A number of MPs then took this issue up quite seriously, made public statements, and funny enough, the HSC then wrote to us and asked if we could withdraw our public comments on this, because actually they thought that when they were giving us this information, it wasn't going to be for public record or for publication. So I actually wonder sometimes who in Amazon actually got to the HSC as well in some respects. But the funny thing was, a number of these MPs then went to a big Amazon fulfillment centre, invited by the glitz of Amazon to go see for themselves what it was like to work in these fantastic, shiny, entrepreneurial workplace of the 21st century. What Amazon didn't realise was that when these MPs got there, they actually made a statement from the steps of one of the largest fulfillment centres in the country, where we have an enormous amount of organising activity taking place. And Amazon, they demanded that G&B be allowed into the meeting and have a conversation. Amazon just shut the doors and basically told the MPs to go away, and was quite upset about how they were treated. You know, and if there's nothing more that epitomizes just how bad this company is in terms of its non-relationships and its proud heritage of non-relationships with trade unions, is the Amazon managers training videos. And you know, and we've got them posted on YouTube if anybody wants to have a look at them. Whole Foods is a subsidiary of Amazon, and they've got an anti-union training video that takes place there. And then there's a very similar anti-union training video that managers are subjected to. And the training video is based on how to spot and organize against union activity. So, you know, they've taken it seriously. They, you know, thank you for doing a video to show us how stereotyped we are as trade unionists, because we've learned from that video, and hopefully that we can take some of that activities into account. We've had leaflets ripped off of our members going through security gates. We've had the phones seized. We've had officers being followed to toilets and stood outside the cubicles so they can't make phone calls when they're representing members. We've had some really awful, dodgy experiences from this company. But you know, I'll mention one thing that's taking place.
You're going to need to be quick, Mick, because we have to move on.
Yeah, no problem. And so one of the big issues around there is, you know, what's happening in the United States at the moment, and the millions that Amazon is spending on trying to thwart the SW's campaign for union organization at Bessemer in Alabama, which has actually brought the President of the United States out this week to make a public statement absolutely slamming and criticizing Amazon for interfering in a union campaign. So it would have been nice to talk about some of the activities that we're actually in. But you know, why is Amazon actually really like this? Well, you know, a report that's been recently published by Oxfam is quite clear that Amazon and Bezos have made that much money out of the pandemic. And in one day alone, he made an estimated $13 million that they could have afforded to have paid every Amazon worker $105,000 bonus, or in UK sterling, 78,000, and he would have still had the same money he had pre-COVID. So this is what it's all about. It's about basic, nasty exploitation. And because we don't have the rights to access, because we don't have the rights to organize in the UK, that many different tactics are being employed by companies like Amazon, you know. And I talked about the shiny technology, but, you know, here's a warning from us to Amazon, just in case you think we've gone a little bit quiet in the last couple of weeks. Well, you know, it took us 6 years in the making to winning the Supreme Court against Uber, another shiny technology company, another company that's brought 18th century mill owner practices back into the UK. And the last point about this is these people pride themselves on being disruptors. Actually, that's an old-fashioned terminology in some respects, in a new way, that is being saying that they don't recognize laws of a country, and they don't recognize the employment laws. Yeah. Well, we proved last Friday in the Supreme Court, we disrupted a disruptor, and we'll definitely disrupt Amazon until we get a recognition and a collective bargaining agreement. Thanks, Cad.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Mick. No one can ever accuse you of going quietly into anything, so that was a great oversight into the issues that you're facing and the powers that someone. Problem is, Amazon's turning out like the bank's too big to fail, or so they think, but I'm sure you're on the toes and you'll do something about it. So I'm going to move swiftly on to our last speaker of the evening, who is Eileen Turnbull. Eileen, I said at the beginning who she is. She is the researcher for the Shrewsbury24 campaign. For over 10 years, she has been responsible for doggedly pursuing the powers that be behind the Shrewsbury case, tracking down documents and finally obtaining the fresh evidence that she needed to take to the Court of Appeal on behalf of the pickets earlier in this month. She, again, is a long-term friend and confidant of mine, so I'm very, very happy to give the platform now to Eileen. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Cad, and can I just say how much I've enjoyed listening to all the speakers tonight. It's been a privilege, actually. I'll just go straight into it. After 47 years, I am absolutely delighted to tell you that we've succeeded in having the Shrewsbury pickets case heard in the Court of Appeal. This is a tremendous victory for all trade unionists. It was heard on the 3rd and the 4th of February. The judges have reserved their judgment and currently we're waiting for the outcome. The Shrewsbury24 campaign was set up in 2006 and has worked closely with the pickets for 15 years. Our aim is to have the convictions of all the North Wales pickets quashed. They arose from the first and only National Building Workers' Strike in 1972. At the end of 3 trials in Shrewsbury Crown Court in 1974, 6 trade unionists were imprisoned for picketing. Yes, imprisoned. 16 more received suspended prison sentences. The pickets have always, to this day, maintained that they were victims of a miscarriage of justice. We knew, the campaign knew, that only the Court of Appeal could quash the pickets' convictions. And we also knew that the Criminal Cases Review Commission was the only legal body who could refer the pickets' convictions to the Court of Appeal. To persuade the CCRC to use its statutory powers to refer the convictions is not an easy task. Ask any miscarriage of justice campaigner and they will tell you that. As an illustration, in 2019 and to 2020, the CCRC received 1,000 334 applications from people claiming they had suffered a miscarriage of justice. In the same year, the CCRC referred just 29 cases for appeal, and that's around 2%. And I can speak because I've read the annual reports for over the last 10, 12 years, as you must know, and that's basically average. That's absolutely correct. We always knew we had a mammoth task. The CCRC would only refer the pickets' convictions if we obtained fresh evidence. And that means evidence that was not available for the original trials in 73 and 74. As a campaign committee member, I carried out extensive research over a period of 10 years to find that evidence. We lodged the pickets applications to the CCRC in 2012. We sent in several further tranches of evidence after 5 years. We were turned down completely. And in 2017, we were told, that's it. There is no further, that you can't go any further with this. But we never gave up. We had the most tremendous support from trade unions, and Howard's here tonight. And I want to say a special thanks to him, because Unite have always been in the forefront of supporting us, always. And I thank you for that. 21 national unions and hundreds of union branches, trades councils and Labour Party branches affiliated to the Shrewsbury24 campaign. And this backing was crucial for strengthening our resolve to fight on. We challenged the CCRC in court by the way of a judicial review. We argued that its decision was perverse and that the CCRC had not understood the correct legal test to apply to our fresh evidence. At the judicial review hearing in the Administrative Court in Birmingham in April 2019, our barrister, Danny Friedman of Matrix Chambers, put our case. And after 2 hours, the CCRC conceded, and we were absolutely jubilant. But it took them a further 10 months to accept our fresh evidence and agree to refer the pickets' convictions to the Court of Appeal. I'll just say a little bit about how we actually obtained the evidence, because I think it is important. Our starting point in 2007 was to ask the Labour government to release all documents relating to the Shrewsbury trials in 73 and 74. And in reply, we were told that documents were being held back under Section 23 of the Freedom of Information Act, and to release them would be a threat to national security. And this is a Labour government. We were absolutely shocked. But I knew then that I was really up against it, so decided to try and find the evidence myself. And I travelled the length and breadth of the country to various archives, cross-referencing documents as I went along. What is before the Court of Appeal just now is just a fraction of the information I managed to obtain about the trials. The CCRC and the Court of Appeal are only concerned with fresh evidence, and which deals with the legal issues surrounding the pickets' trials and convictions. But I have evidence, information, and it's a fascinating story, and it includes the role of the employers, the police, the prosecution, and the judiciary. The appeal that we presented to the Court of Appeal last month has 2 grounds, which we have argued denied the pickets the right to a fair trial. Now, I know we're very strapped for time here, Cad, so I'll go through this very, very briefly. Firstly, we found that the initial witness statements, a lot of the initial witness statements were destroyed. And I discovered this looking at documents at Kew, and the file was huge. But I did actually come across, I photocopied everything and took it home to Liverpool as I would. But I did come across a very important document, and I have to tell you this, it's a prosecution document. It's written by a Superintendent Glover, who wrote to Desmond Fennell, who was junior counsel at the time, prosecuting counsel. And what it says in paragraph 16, so that counsel would be aware, it was mentioned that not all handwritten statements were still in existence, some having been destroyed after a fresh statement had been obtained. And in most cases, the first statement was taken before photographs were available for witnesses and before the officers taking the statements knew what they were trying to prove. It goes without saying, police should not destroy original handwritten statements. If prosecution counsel are told this, they have a duty to inform the defence and the court, and they didn't. The second ground of our appeal was based upon the evidence I found from Kew, which was, but I had to FOI at this time. And it was about a documentary called The Red Under the Bed. I'd originally discovered this film and it was broadcast halfway through the trial, the first Pickett's trial. When the Pickett's lawyers discovered this, they made an application to the court and had the makers of the TV programme, Anglia TV and Woodrow Wyatt, they brought a contempt of court order to the judge. The judge ordered the production of the film, watched it in chambers, but he dismissed the application and no more was heard of it. Now, this is the important part. The Cabinet Office file that I obtained in 2013 is called Woodrow Wyatt's TV programme, Red Under the Bed. It showed the government through the Foreign Office's Information Research Department was heavily involved in the film, providing documents and witnesses for Wyatt to use. Now, the film showed the building workers' strike, footage of building sites which had walls and windows damaged, etc. It also showed shots of Shrewsbury Crown Court and footage of the pickets who were on trial, leading a demonstration in Shrewsbury 6 months prior to the hearing. I also discovered a film of a studio discussion of the documentary. Now, this documentary had a number of highly prejudicial comments made in the discussion by Woodrow Wyatt. And he was able to make those points during the studio discussion that the IBA had required him to remove from his narrative in the documentary before they would approve it for transmission. And that's an important point. I also made the discovery that a journalist, Simon Regan, who'd written an article as a part of a 2-page spread in the News of the World in October 72, and he wrote he opposed as a striking building worker and when picketing with them in summer, witnessing intimidation, violence and damage to property. I found documents at Kew that showed that the article was seen by the Attorney General, who asked the DPP to make inquiries. The DPP wrote to several police forces for reporting to Regan's claims. I found those reports, notably from Northampton and the City of Birmingham police forces. And in a nutshell, both reports said that Regan was telling a pack of lies. And yet he was interviewed several months later on camera for Wyatt's Red Under the Bed film, repeating his discredited claims about violent picketing. The information about the Red Under the Bed was put on our website shortly after I discovered it. I could say a lot more, but I really haven't got the time. What I've learned from my research is the need for patience and perseverance. A great supporter of our campaign, Ken Loach, said to me that the truth will always get out eventually. You have to keep digging and you have to keep demanding. I certainly hope that the information that I've dug up will bring justice for the pickets. And as I said at the beginning, we are waiting the decision of the Court of Appeal. Please check our website for information and follow us on Twitter and Facebook to get the latest news. And can I say again, Cad, thank you very, very much for inviting me to speak here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen, for joining us and telling us in your normal, understated way what you have achieved. I've had experience of working with Eileen. She is meticulous, she is organised, and she is determined. I gave her a box file of papers from my father's papers, and it came back organised, indexed. It was practically colour coded in the way that it was given back to me. I'd given her all these papers that were just so, and it is that determination that has led to this case now reaching the case where it's at. So best of luck. I'm sure that you will win, but we are waiting on that decision and we're waiting on that justice. So thanks very much for joining us here tonight. A pleasure as ever to see you. So I think we've got time for a few questions and a bit of discussion maybe. There's a couple here that are aimed at you, Howard. And given that you went off track and started talking politics, you won't be surprised to hear that that's where the questions have come from. So we have one from, let's see, I wrote them down. We've got one from, well, there's one from Terry Renshaw and a very similar one from Paul Devlin, basically saying, Terry's asking, should Unite cease affiliation to the Labour Party? And on a similar kind of tone, Paul Devlin is saying, is the Labour Party still fit to be the political vehicle for trade union purposes? So while you're giving that some thought, Howard, if you want to answer that, I'll dig out some more questions.
Well, there you go. Like, I'm supposed to announce it first on here, Amarcad, that, you know, at some stage in the not too distant future. Listen, I suppose the way that I would like to answer this, Cad, is that it's not up to us to show a relevance to the Labour Party. It's up to the Labour Party to show a relevance to us. They're fortunate enough to get funding off us. They're fortunate enough to get our activist support. They're fortunate enough to have access to our workplaces and fortunate enough to have access to our communities. And they were created by us. It's the Labour Party that needs to think that they affiliate to the trade union movement and not the trade union movement that thinks that they affiliate to the Labour Party. The Labour Party has to show its relevance. And if it fails to show its relevance, then it will become what that says, an irrelevance. And it will no longer be a voice for workers. And the path that it is on right here now is one that is going to lead the Labour Party into an existential crisis, where it will no longer have a relevance for workers. It will no longer have a relevance outside Westminster. And it won't be me that will be calling for disaffiliation. The call will be wide and spread out amongst our members and our activists. So if Keir Starmer was watching, Cad, I would say very clearly to him that if you don't speak for workers, then you will not have any role in society and you won't have much of a role in the Labour Party either. But for the Labour Party to keep that title of a party of workers, then they need to speak for workers.
Thanks very much for that, Howard. There's a couple of comments here. There's one from John Toner aimed at Alison, saying that he commends the courage and strength of character of Alison and her colleagues in fighting the institutional deception of the Met, and says more strength to your cause and extending best wishes for your success. Similarly, there is one in from Chris Frost, who says not so much a question, but some feedback saying that the stories that we've heard tonight have been very valuable to those of us who are a bit contained, as we all are, in our own little bubbles, concentrating in our own sectors and don't necessarily always hear or listen to issues and problems facing other areas. There is a question here from Kat Cray, who is an RMT health and safety rep on the tubes, and says, do you think that under the guise of COVID, we've seen employers dismiss both health and safety legislation and obligations to consult with a healthy sector? Are they getting away with those? I mean, I would say, according to our report, which I will give another plug for, yes to both.
And not just them, the HSE as well, Card, have been proven to be completely ineffective. So
absolutely,
rigor, obviously, but they've ignored. And obviously the message to anybody out there in the workplace is keep your own evidence in respect of the unsafe working practices and exercise your rights for Section 44, Section 100 to leave the workplace, but keep your evidence. Because if you do contract COVID, and if you do contract long COVID, then you need to prove that it's most likely to have come from the workplace. And obviously, we're all going to have a fight in our hands to make sure long COVID becomes an industrial disease. So that's up to everybody out there to keep their records. Unite's got a helpline up for anyone who thinks they've contracted COVID in the workplace. And please go through your trade union in respect of it. The more evidence that we can gather in respect of the working practices, the more likely it is that we'll be able to show that long COVID should be an industrial disease.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. There's one here for Eileen. Now, Eileen, you used to work for the GMB as well. I understand you were a legal officer there, weren't you? Right. So, talking about legal framework, what changes in the legal framework do you think are needed to ensure that there's not another Shrewsbury24? Now, that's a bit of a big question.
Well, interestingly, back in 73 and 74. There was no legislation regarding picketing. Picketing, solidarity was when you went to somebody else's picket line and you supported that picket line. There wasn't anything unusual in that. Now, that's what I'd like to see. I'd like us to get back to those days when there was no legislation regarding picket lines, because, you know, this nonsense about secondary picketing, it was about solidarity. That's what it was about. And, you know, when we're talking about 1972, when the pickets were on strike, that was the most, if you like, active in terms of strikes ever in this country. And that's including the 1926 general strike. And you know, there wasn't one that was lost. And the reason there wasn't one strike lost is because of the solidarity that was shown between industries. It wasn't confined to one industry. It was across the board. You know, we talk about dockers, quite rightly, who support all industries. Well, at that time, everybody did. Fords did, you know, Standard Triumph did. I'm in Liverpool, so I'm only speaking from where I live. But that's exactly what happened. And, you know, I'd like other people to come in on this, because those were the days. And that's when we succeeded. I remember Bob Crow speaking at a Labour Party conference, and he got up and he said, you know, he said, I keep hearing this notion about we don't want to go back to the 70s. He said, well, I, for one, do. I want to go back to the 70s, he said, because that's when we had solidarity and that's when we supported each other. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but in principle, I think it does. And thank you.
That's true. It's not what new legislation we want. It's what existing legislation we need removed from the statute book. That shouldn't be there in the first place. Before I just want to ask Alison, who's sat there quietly for some time now. You've listened to the rest of the presentations. I don't think there is a specific question in here for you, Alison. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before?
Just a thank you again, giving us the opportunity. I suppose I just wanted to pick up something Eileen said about keep digging and keep demanding. I think that's, you know, I think the other similarity with your campaign, Eileen, is that, you know, it's the strength and weakness of ours, but it's personal. You know, we sort of can't really stop digging. And also, I suppose in the comments, I noticed somebody saying they didn't want to look backwards, they wanted to look forwards. And I think sometimes our campaign gets a bit, not here, I don't mean in this context, but sometimes it gets a bit dismissed because it's looking back, that it seemed to be looking backwards. And actually, it mustn't be that. It must be, we have to understand how we got to where we have done, really, and the state that we are now in. Because I think in terms of teaching, I used to be a school teacher, and, you know, the final bit of that article I wrote for the NEU last week was about how did we get to a state where schools are built without staff rooms, and where head teachers, you know, basically are recruited because they can manage a budget rather than inspire their students and their staff and support their staff. So I think that and that's why it's important to break through, really. And we've done it in bits, but really to break through for the general public to understand the significance of the 50 years of spying on working people, ordinary people across all sorts of different sectors, some in unions, some not in unions. And the bit of the picture that I think worries me the most, actually, which is linked to something that Mick said about Amazon, and it's something that I think most people absolutely don't know, is that whole business about the cloud servers and all of that. It's something that my son talks about, and the internet. And that's the difference between now and the 1970s, you know, and unfortunately, COVID in some ways has given people access to meetings like this, maybe, and to perhaps, you know, the digital access has broadened access for people, but at the same time, we lose something very, very important when we're not face to face, and the surveillance and there's a few fault lines at the moment that are breaking across, not in a good way, our movements, and the internet fuels a lot of that, because people can't have conversations face to face and challenge each other in a comradely way, and then there's all the kind of you know, I'm sure the state are operating there, I'm sure corporate interests are operating there, you know, with fake accounts and stirring up trouble, and I think there's some of the challenges that certainly I think we all face. But it's been great listening to everybody, and thank you again from us.
Smashing. Well, we were due to finish around about 8:10, and it's now 8:25. So as much as I would love to continue the discussion, I do think that it's probably a good time for us to finish. This event will remain on the streaming that we have done, so it'll be out there, and there'll be a lot of information on our website, a lot of the links, a lot of the suggestions, a lot of the links to other websites will be there for you to all watch. At the end of this, there will be a slide that comes up that explains our next event, which will go through the report that we have just published, which is HSE, the role of the HSE and COVID during this pandemic, and the failure of that regulatory body to do its job. So there'll be a list of speakers there on who will be attending that. There's information on how to subscribe, how to get other bits of our information. Please sign up to our newsletter. It is brilliant. It goes out once a week. It updates you on all the stuff that's happening and the legal developments that we need to know about. So thank you again to all of our speakers. You have been brilliant. It has been very interesting. Thank you for the audience for listening, and we hope to see you at future events by the Institute and the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom. So have a good evening. See you again next time.